Happy video day, guys. So for today's video, we're going to be doing a Make Up Your Mind. And my Make Up Your Mind this week is going to be on a brand that I absolutely love. It's Natasha Denona. She's releasing a brand new palette called the Bronze Palette, and it's going to be one of her midi size palettes. So it's a $65 palette. It's not her large palettes. It's like her in-between palettes. And I was so excited to hear Natasha Denona was releasing a new palette because you guys know I'm a huge fan of hers. I love her formula. I love to have her palettes. Like, I have like a lot of them, but I don't buy ones that I know I don't need because I don't collect makeup. I love makeup. I love to have makeup. I love doing eye looks, but makeup goes bad. So I only pick up what I really need or if I really love something so much, and that's why Make Up Your Mind was created. In this series, what I do is before deciding whether I'm gonna purchase a palette or not, I search through my collection and I try to find similar tones in my collection. I'm not looking for dupes. I'm looking for things that are similar. When I apply it on the lid and everything's blended out, it may give me a very similar look to the brand new release. And then I can decide for myself, do I want this palette? Do I own too many similar things? And also by looking at a color story, I can decide whether it's a color story I'm really gonna use. And that's usually what I go by the most, is I look at a color story and I say, am I gonna use this a lot? And if I am, even if I have the colors in my collection, it's worth it for me to get it. I have noticed as I've been doing this series more and more, when I do purchase a palette that I know I have the colors of it, I almost feel like it was a waste for me to buy it. That just happened to me recently, and it was kind of like an eye-opener of, wow, this is actually working for me. Her palette looks absolutely stunning. When I saw it released, I loved everything about it. The only thing is it reminded me of another palette that I have from Natasha Denona. It reminded me so much of the Metropolis palette. And I have it sitting in front of me because Metropolis was one of the palettes that I reached into quite a lot to create this color story. It's funny because I love the idea of a bronze palette, but I almost feel like it was not what I thought was going to happen. I really thought she was going to go in a different direction for this palette launch, but either way, this is the palette that we have to work with. If you guys are interested in it, I believe it's launching today. I'm gonna link it down below. It will be available at Sephora. But let's get into this video. I'm gonna be showing you guys what I came up with and what I think is going to be similar to it. And yeah, if you guys are new and you've never seen me before, I'm Christina Brooke, and I would love it if you'd hit the subscribe button if you like makeup and fashion, because that's what we talk about on the channel. So let's get into it. I always show you guys is my results. So let's go ahead and do that. So these are the results. Now I'm gonna forewarn you, I decided to use Natasha Denona's Instagram live images of her swatches because I have learned from purchasing from Natasha Denona multiple times, the swatches that Natasha Denona has on her website always appear darker. And every time I try to go by those swatches, I end up realizing that I thought the palette was going to be so much darker and deeper. And when I get it, it's always a lot lighter. So for the past few palettes, I've been going by her stories. And I believe that even for the Love palette, I think that the colors that I was able to find were more true to what the colors were going to be. It was a lot brighter of a palette than most people thought, because if you went by her swatches on her website, they looked deeper. It almost looked like it was going to be a deep purple palette. But if you saw her Insta story and you saw her swatching them, you kind of already had an idea that the colors were going to be a little brighter, which is what turned me off to that palette. So I ended up just going with her Insta story swatches, and I looked at the swatches that are on her website, and they do look deeper than the colors I'm going to show you today. But I need to make up my mind somehow, and what I decided to do is just go with what has worked for me, and that is going by her live swatches. I guess we'll find out if they were similar or not when people start reviewing the palette, but now that you guys have seen my results, I do feel like I was able to find most of these colors. I don't think every single one of them was spot on, but the problem with this palette is so many of the colors are so close in color that I don't even know honestly if it needed to be spot on. So we're gonna get into that. As I talk about what I found, we'll talk about that. But a majority of the colors came out of Natasha Denona's Metropolis palette. I did jump also into Natasha Denona's Gold palette. I got one color from her mini Glam, and finally a few of the tones actually came out of Jaclyn Hill with Morphe collab. And the last palette is from Marc Jacobs, and considering the amount of shades inside of this palette, that's not a lot of palettes for me to jump into. Usually with a palette like this, I would have like so many palettes that I was going into. So that already kind of makes me think that the color story is not anything that's extremely unique to my personal collection. But let's start off with the first color, and I'll start showing you guys what I started to notice. So for the first color, what I ended up doing was jumping into Metropolis. I was looking at this color story, guys, and even though if you take out some of those blues in here, this is primarily like a bronzy palette that some of it shifts a little bit orange, which I did hear on her Insta story. A lot of the shades in this palette do that. So what I ended up doing was jumping into the color Rust. I jumped into this color up here called Rust. Now she did say in her Insta story that this one went a little bit more orange. So when I was looking at the entire palette and I was looking at the swatches, I said, you know what, Rust really looks similar. I don't know, it can't be exact, guys. I mean, I don't think that she's going to release a palette that has the exact same shades as Metropolis, so I'm assuming that the undertone's going to be somewhat different. But is it going to be that big of a difference when applied to the lid? That's what I really don't think. So that's why I feel like, yeah, they might be a tad off, but I don't know, like they just look so similar in the swatch. So for the next one, I actually jumped into two colors from Metropolis. I ended up jumping into this color called Pure, but Pure on its own went a little bit too dark brown. So I added a little bit of Crisium, and this Crisium color has a little bit more orange to it. When you mix them together, you do come out with a color that looked a little bit more similar to what I'm seeing coming out of the new bronze palette. I do feel like the one that's gonna be in the bronze palette might have a little bit less orange in it than the two tones that I found inside of Metropolis, but looking through my collection, when it comes to like a browny orangey tones, I don't have many of those. Most of my browns go a little bit too cool, so I think that this is the closest that I can get, and I do believe that it may be kind of close when blended and all that good stuff. So for the next color, when I saw her swatch this, it really reminded me so much of another color that was inside of Metropolis, the Crisium color right here. It almost looks more yellow in the pan, but when it swatches, it's like an orangey yellow. And I don't know, when I kind of swatched it on my arm and I kept looking at her Insta story and I just kept looking at it and I kept going, it looks so similar. I know it can't be, but it has to be pretty close. So I ended up just going with this color. I don't have many yellowy tones in my collection because I'm not a huge fan of this yellowy orange tone, and you know, it's just not one of my favorite colors. I can tell you the amount of times that I've used the tone that's in the Metropolis has probably been very, very minimal. It's not one of my favorite colors. I do know it kind of looks good with like a bronzy look, but it's just not one that I tend to like to use. So for the next one, I think that this is where she got a little bit unique in the sense that these colors I couldn't find in any of her palettes, or at least anything that was semi-similar. But when I jumped into the Jaclyn Hill palette, I remember there was this color called Chip. Now Chip is a really dark brown that almost leans purple, and I do remember in her Insta story she was kind of expressing how this is a deep brown that has a little bit like a purple to it. So I figured that this is the closest that I can find in my collection. Chip is such a gorgeous deepening shade, and I just really feel like it could have something semi-similar to this color, so that's why I ended up going with Chip. And then when I was looking at this palette, the next color, I just jumped right next door, and this color right here called 24/7 is almost like a purpley brown, and that's what she described that the next color was going to be. Now the difference between these, I know she said that hers is a duochrome, and hers looks like a really cool duochrome. It's not going to compare to the Jaclyn Hill formula, but it's going to have something semi-similar, and I definitely know that the duochrome inside of the Natasha Denona one is pretty spectacular looking. I do feel like this tone right here may be one of the most unique tones in the entire palette, and when I was looking at it, I was like, ooh, that looks so pretty. So from the whole entire first row, the one that really is calling my attention the most is actually this duochrome purple brownish toned color. It looks really, really pretty. So that's one of the ones that I'm like, ooh, that looks nice. Now I'm gonna tell you, the first 5 shades, those are going to create the most beautiful bronzy look. So definitely color story here is on point, which Natasha Denona does really, really good. The color story is on point. I definitely think that this is going to be absolutely gorgeous. I mean, if you kind of even see what I've got going here, I know that that's going to work so good together. So I'm loving the color story. It just looks really, really gorgeous. And then if we jump into the next 5, the first one was another one that I ended up jumping back into the Metropolis palette. And there's this color down here called Antique. And Antique just reminded me a lot of the brown that I saw in her swatches. I do think there's a chance that hers may actually be lighter than the tone in Metropolis, but they're still within that orangey brown. Now, I will tell you, I think I like cooler browns that are a little bit deeper than these orangey browns, and it's just a personal preference. So the fact that there is a few more orangey browns in here, and I do know that she did say a couple of times that they're more orangey, it's not really something that's really selling me for me personally, because I do like more rich browns. So that one is like for me. So the next tone is another one I think that was supposed to be supposed to be more unique. And what I ended up seeing was when she swatched it, it reminded me a lot of this color called Crest inside of Metropolis. Now, this one is not going to be exact for sure. I do think that Crest is a lot more bright, and hers in the new palette, it almost looks like it's going to be a little bit of a deeper tone. Now, the reason I used it is because that's one of those colors that I don't have a million times over. It may be another one of the most unique colors for me in this entire palette, because I just don't have that color. It's very pretty, and I do like these more orangey kind of peachy shifting tones. They're really, really gorgeous. So this color is another one that I'm like, kind of like you. So I ended up jumping into the extravaganza. I pulled this one in just because I wanted to use this gold, because when I compared it to the gold that was in the gold palette from Natasha, it just is a little bit lighter, and I feel like this palette has a lighter tone to it, whereas the gold palette went more gold. So that's why I went with this one. I'm also thinking that this one's not going to be spot on, but then again, like all over the lid, it's not going to make a huge difference. Like I have a really beautiful green shadow all over my lid, and if I would have used my Starry Eyes to hypnotize, I probably would have been able to do a very similar look, even though the Starry Eyes is deeper of a green, and you may not have been able to tell like a huge difference in an eye look, if you know what I'm saying. So this one, even though I don't think it's going to be exact, I really don't think it's going to make or break the palette for me. The next one is actually another tone that I thought I was gonna like this tone more than I do. So inside of the gold palette, there's this color called Dijon, and it reminds me a lot of the color, especially the description that she said of this color. It just reminds me so much of this Dijon color. I think that the Dijon might be a little deeper if you compared them both together side by side. Dijon might be a little bit deeper, but I don't know. I feel like they're going to be pretty close when you blend them. So that's just my opinion on that one. I think that those two might be kind of close. So the last one was another one of these bronzy metallic type of shades, and I went back into Metropolis, and there was 2 tones in here that I mixed together. I grabbed the color called Fuse right here, and what I did was I added a little bit of Imperia on top and just created a tone that looked a little bit more similar to what I see inside of her new palette. I do think that there is a little bit of mixing from the Metropolis palette, like their colors are not going to be straight from the palette, but if you mix a few of the tones together, you may be able to create some tones that look a little bit more similar to what she's doing for her new palette. So now we've finished off already 10 shades, and I will tell you a lot of them I feel like I've seen similarities to the Metropolis, at least in a similar look vibe. I feel like Metropolis is doing something kind of similar. So for the last row, I ended up using Metropolis one more time for the next tone. This is one that I think is going to be very unique, and I do not think you're going to be able to find it 100% in Metropolis. If you grab this color called Helena, which is right here, what I did was I added a little bit of Claret, which is more red. And when you mix the orange and the red together, and they are a metallic, they start to create an orangey red metallic, which looks kind of similar to what I saw that she did with her swatches on her Insta Live. So I'm thinking that that color is going to create something pretty close. It's going to be pretty close, and it's a pretty color. I can tell you the times that I've worn that color on my lid. So for the next one, this one is one that's a wild shot for me because I'm not sure. I could have probably stuck to the gold palette for this one, but I ended up using the mini Glam. Nice gold in the front. It just reminded me a lot of this gold. She did say in her Insta story that it had a little bit more champagne to it, and when I swatched this one, she said in her story, she did say it was like a brownish champagne, and that's kind of like what that reminds me of. So that's why I ended up using that shade. If it's not like that one, this is one of those shades that you may be able to find something really similar inside of the gold palette from Natasha. The next one was another one that I jumped right back into, Metropolis, and I mixed two different shades together. I ended up grabbing the color Crest, which is the only color inside of this palette that does like that shift that's almost like a peachy orange. And what I did was I added a little bit of Imperia on top. So Imperia is the one that's a little bit more gold. Now this is another one that's that really cool duochrome of hers. So I'm not gonna be able to create it 100%, but if you do put Imperia on top of that color Crest, you start to create a yellow shift on top of like a peachy orange. And it almost looks similar to what is happening in the new palette. Is it going to be spot on? Of course not, because this one is a duochrome in the new palette, so it's going to do the shift on its own, and this one's just like kind of mimicking it, you know? So the next color, what I ended up doing was going into gold palette, and I went into this color called Arium. And I don't know, Arium to me just looked like it could be similar. This is another one I'm not like 100% sold on, but it just has a really similar tone. And I mean, like, I'm looking at this palette, guys, and we're talking about a lot of bronzes and golds and a lot of bronze gold metallics in here, like a lot. So then the last one, I jumped into Metropolis, and I went into this color right here, and I just grabbed the color Rope. And I think Rope is pretty similar to the color that's coming out inside of this brand new palette. Like, it's just similar, you know? It's similar. So I have everything swatched on my arm. It's gonna look a lot brighter on screen than it actually is in real life, but I'm gonna tell you guys, like, the palette looks pretty, the color story looks gorgeous. I think somebody who doesn't own like a bronzy palette, doesn't have a bunch of gold in their collection, you're probably going to be head over heels about this, and I'm gonna tell you, Natasha Denona's formula is spectacular. It really is. If I wasn't picking so many out of Metropolis, I probably would be considering this a little bit stronger. But my problem that I really have here is I don't use gold often. Gold is one of those shades that in a palette, they just look so amazing. Like, if you really think about it, you look at a gold palette and it almost like shines in your eyes. From Natasha Denona is a little different because the golds in here go champagne. And champagne and me, we get along more. We get along more than orangey brasses and yellowy golds. Those colors I tend to not use as much as champagnes and cooler tone golds. This one goes more bronze, which makes sense. It's a bronze palette. And that's probably the reason that I don't use Metropolis as much as I probably should, because I tend to not do those kind of looks. So when I'm looking at this palette, parts of it really intrigue me. Like these peachy kind of shifting tones, those look like they could be really, really cool. Some of these like browns that have a little bit like a purple shift, like the duochrome, that could be kind of interesting, even though I'm not a huge duochromer. But for the most part, this palette is not like what I thought Natasha was gonna come out with right now, or what I thought I would spend money on another Natasha Denona palette for. So for right now, I'm going to make up my mind and say to you guys that I am probably not going to buy this palette. What I think I'm going to do is wait until I start seeing a few people receive it and see if it is in this same realm, if it's very close to like the bronzy golds, and if it doesn't lean more champagne, then I already know for me it's just not going to be my style palette. It's gonna be a palette that I probably won't touch. So that's just personal preference. But if this is a color story that you are into, this is a palette you want to grab because Natasha Denona's formula is spectacular, and these midi size palettes are the best size. Like, I honestly think they are amazing. I love it this size. I think she should do all her palettes this size. It's just really, really, really attainable, and you get a bunch of different shades. It's very, very, but anyways, that is my opinion. That's what I'm saying for right now. We'll see, it could change. I want to know from you guys right now, are you planning on picking up this palette? What do you think? Are you thinking it's similar to Metropolis, or is there another palette you think it's more similar to? Leave me those comments. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I will talk to you